We were speaking there about the government's position on trying to introduce a $7 Medicare GP co-payment. Terry Barnes was the architect of that government policy, and he's now urging the federal government to put this change to the Senate to at least test the numbers on the crossbenches for this policy. We heard on AM from Senator Abbott, the leader of the government in the Senate, that the government is not ruling out bypassing Parliament and trying to introduce a co-payment through regulations. Terry Barnes was once a senior advisor to Tony Abbott when Tony Abbott was the health minister. He joins us now from Melbourne. Terry Barnes, welcome to breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
The government hasn't yet introduced the legislation for the GP co-payment. It was pretty clear from what Senator Abbott was saying. They have no plans to do that this year in the 5 remaining days, and maybe not next year either, if so many of the media reports today are accurate. What do you think of that? Should the government at least give it a go?
Well, basically, the co-payment is due to start on the 1st of July next year, and any legislation to enable it can actually wait until probably as late as May. But I think they should actually take something to the Parliament, and particularly to the Senate, and actually go in and fight for a principle here, because I think the principle of the co-payment, the principle of a price signal, is actually more important than the measure itself. And I would rather them take a plan B and debate it than to actually walk away without a fight.
And just broadly, as a broad principle, not just around this issue, do you think there's a lack of that? I mean, we keep reading all the time the government's strategy is to not put things into the Parliament that it can't get through because it doesn't want to be seen as impotent, or it doesn't want to be seen as messy and disorganised and not in control. Is that the way our democracy should be running, do you think, in our Parliament? This is not the only government to behave like this.
Well, I think that's right, Fran. I think it's important that governments do take stands on principle, do actually stand for something, and are prepared to defend their position. I think the government has done handled a bad hand pretty well in terms of the GP co-payment, but they could have sold it better from the budget onwards. And now they're basically deciding to cut their losses either by reworking the proposal, which is what I hope they do, or by walking away from it altogether, which I think is a mistake. I mean, down here in Victoria, for instance, the coalition government is going to the election on Saturday, basically having spent half its term doing nothing. And I think that's one of the reasons that Dennis Napthine will struggle to get back. I think Tony Abbott and the coalition in Canberra needs to look at the lessons of Victoria and other governments that don't take their chances, and maybe just be a bit bold in the way they approach things.
A bit bold and a bit flexible, maybe. You say the government's handled a bad hand pretty well, but in fact they haven't really got anywhere as far as I can see. Should they have been a bit more prepared if, as you say, the key principle is to get the price signal in rather than be stuck at a price signal of $7? Should they have been quicker to try and negotiate on winding back the price signal, maybe excluding concession card holders, which would hit the bottom line to be sure, but get that price signal in there? Was that your advice to them?
Well, they didn't seek my advice, Fran, so I can't really sort of...
I thought you might have offered it.
I've certainly offered it publicly. My sense is that it was pretty obvious from the budget itself that the proposal wasn't going to fly as it is, and the time for Plan B was probably a few months ago. But I think it can be simplified. It can be made cleaner and fairer, and I would rather have something like that put forward and at least voted down, so that the government can walk away and say we fought the good fight, but our opponents basically are enemies of reform.
It's 12 to 8 on breakfast. We're speaking with Terry Barnes. Terry Barnes was the architect of the government's budget proposal for the introduction of a $7 GP co-payment. Terry Barnes, there is a suggestion now that the government will walk away from trying to get legislation through the Senate, but still remains committed to the notion of the policy and will try and get it in through regulation, trying to get around the Parliament through regulation. There has been some legal doubt surrounding that course of action, but what's your view on this? Could it work, and should they try it?
Well, I accept that there are some legal doubts around it, but the one thing that the government can do is actually set Medicare rebates through the Medicare benefit schedule. And as you know, part of the budget proposal is cutting the rebate by $5. And my understanding is that the minister can actually make that determination. I don't think they will without enabling legislation to clear up any ambiguity about what are currently bulk billed services. But nonetheless, that part of it is certainly within the bounds of regulation.
So how would that work? Let's go through that, because Catherine King was talking about that earlier, the Shadow Minister. As you say, the current regulations, the current legislation proposes a $5 cut to the Medicare rebate and the introduction of the co-payment. If they scrap the legislation, the Minister could wind back the Medicare rebate for GPs any further by another $7, would it be?
Well, basically what the budget proposal said, and I think the whole point here is that there is no legislation at this time. It's simply a plan.
A policy. Sure, beg your pardon.
Have the $7 co-payment, but cut the Medicare rebate for GP services and pathology and radiology by $5 as an incentive to doctors to actually charge the copay. So yes, I think the problem though is that because the current Medicare legislation does look at bulk billed services, that it probably does need amending to ensure that a co-payment for that type of service can now be charged. But again, I'm not the legal expert as much as the policy one, but I think it's basically something would have to go before the Parliament, I think, at some point.
All right, but just say they try through regulation to wind back the actual Medicare payment, Medicare rebate to doctors. That would take the pressure off the lowest paid, because those who are bulk billed wouldn't be affected by that, but GPs would be affected by that. And some would argue that in effect, over time, would then affect the lowest paid because GPs would stop bulk billing.
Well,
what do you think of that argument?
Well, that's certainly an argument that's put forward. But I think basically a $7 co-payment would not deter people from going to the doctor in the first place. I think that's a very important point to make. But it's also, I think, very important that the government is on safe legal ground, so that anything that it does do is not challenged. But the thing is, we haven't seen any detail because the government hasn't actually put anything on the table, not officially.
Are you disappointed that the AMA has argued so strongly against this proposal? Are you surprised and disappointed about how strongly they opposed it?
Well, I don't want to mince my words here, Fran. I think the leadership of the AMA, which is dominated by the specialist wing of the medical profession, are basically being hypocrites. They talk about social justice in regards to the GP co-payment, yet their specialist members are quite happy to charge what they think they charge. The sky's the limit in some cases in terms of what they charge those very same people. So I think the AMA is playing a double game here. I think their main concern has been about doctors' incomes. The threat to cutting the Medicare rebate was really driving and motivating their opposition, particularly after the budget. I think they were far more principled beforehand when a GP was president of the AMA rather than a specialist.
Terry Barnes, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, Fran.
Terry Barnes, he's the architect of the government's original policy in the budget for a Medicare $7 co-payment, and he's formerly worked as a senior advisor to Tony Abbott when he was a health minister. We do have an invitation to the Health Minister, Peter Dutton, to come on the program this morning to see if he can answer this confusion about whether the government is still committed to trying to legislate a GP $7 co-payment or is looking at regulation.